Welcome to Deleted Saves. On this episode, The Lord of the Rings, War in the North, on Xbox 360. By the early 2010s, we were seeing less direct licensed games from movie properties and more titles based on licensed properties, such as superhero titles or sports games, where a strict movie plot formula did not need to be followed. Today, we will look at a game based on one of the most lucrative licensed properties of the early 2000s. Today, we will look at 2011's The Lord of the Rings, War in the North. The Lord of the Rings trilogy was published in 3 parts between 1954 and 1955, the brainchild of author and English professor at Oxford, J.R.R. Tolkien. The books were written in various stages between 1937 and 1949, mostly during the worst times of World War II, especially when England, where Tolkien lived, suffered under the German Blitz. And once the world began to calm down, Tolkien was able to get the books published. While initially they received mixed reviews, over the years, and well after Tolkien's death, the books have become a source of great study and inspiration. Everything from Tolkien's own experiences fighting in the trenches of World War I, mythology, Christian ideals, and the like. The books themselves have gone on to sell over 150 million copies worldwide. Many other fantasy works can trace their own history back, in some way, to The Lord of the Rings, from Dungeons & Dragons all the way to Game of Thrones. During his lifetime, Tolkien feared having his books translated into other media, especially movies, which he saw as base, crude, and anti-intellectual. While there were a few animated LOTOR movies, as I'll be abbreviating it from now on, they were after Tolkien's death and were not recognized by his estate. It wasn't until 2001 that filmmaker Peter Jackson, until then known for low to mid-budget horror movies, was given the blessing of the Tolkien financial estate, but not the blessing of Tolkien's children, to make movies based on the property, which they figured could be turned for a cheap profit within 2 movies. Jackson disagreed loudly and forced the issue to be made into 3 movies, reasoning if there were 3 books to tell the tale, then he would need 3 movies. The films went on to rake in $2.9 billion worldwide, earned multiple Oscars, and were selected by the Library of Congress for film preservation. Cheap profit indeed. During the mid-2000s, there was a glut of LOTOR games for the PlayStation 2, GameCube, and original Xbox, really just the same games ported across multiple consoles. Most of them were action hack-and-slash style games, trying to emulate the action focus of the recent movies for action-heavy focused consoles. Those games followed the plot of them and the main characters of the 3 movies almost beat for beat, because that is what new fans of the books and the fans of the movies knew. Plus, the rights to make games were broken up across both Electronic Arts and Vivendi Universal in partnership with the Tolkien estate. One would do movie tie-in games, and the other would do games based on the novels. In 2009, Warner Brothers would buy them both out and gain the rights to do both types of game. So a plan was quickly put into motion to create a new type of LOTOR game, especially as almost a decade on from the debut of the first movie, the buzz around the movies and properties was cooling. The principal actors and the directors had moved on to other things, and Warner Brothers wanted to make good on their new property. They began to construct a side story to the main movies, based on a lot of the deep lore from the novels. In War in the North, as the game would be subtitled, you play as not 1 but 3 heroes at once: a human ranger, a dwarven fighter, and an elven mage, very traditional D&D, who are recruited by Aragorn, the hero king of the books and movies, to investigate why the forces of the Witch King of Angmar is building an army of his own to the north, and why the Nazgul... Look, right now, if you haven't seen the movies or read the books, go do so. They will explain who all these funny-sounding named folks are. Have attacked the outpost of Sarn Ford, which is on the way to the homeland of the Hobbits. Aragorn warns this small force of new rangers that a hobbit comes from Hobbiton and is heading to Bree, where they are meeting, carrying a quote-unquote great burden, a.k.a. the Ring of Power. Aragorn needs these 3 characters to make a ruckus at this army camp of orcs and trolls and draw the attention of the Witch King away from Bree so that Aragorn can meet the hobbit and help him get to his destination. In typical epic hero fashion, the 3 newly minted heroes accept the job. knowing that even though it may lead to their doom, interrupting the machinations of a greater evil is worth it. This, of course, runs counter to a more traditional D&D party, who would already be whining about the job, arguing about more pay, trying to pickpocket the locals, fuck the barmaid, or trying to sell the zero-level NPCs on the concept of microwaves, or cell phones, or flushing toilets. If they hadn't already fallen asleep at the table and aren't doing a PhD-level research of the rules book for lore inconsistencies and rules that they can use against the storyteller and other players. But I digress. The three heroes follow the trail of high fantasy breadcrumbs from Bree to Rivendell, to the cursed Barrow Downs, to the Etten Moors, to the snowy hills of a place called Mount Gundabad, chasing an evil sorcerer named Agandaur, who was Sauron's right-hand wizard. This Agandaur has been tasked with allying a dragon hiding in the northern mountains, and building a stronghold in the ruins of those mountains, so that the famed Fellowship of the Ring and all of Middle-earth would need to fight a war on two fronts. Along the way, the three heroes meet the characters from the movies and exchange witty banter and tips on what is going on in the world. In effect, this means that the Fellowship heads east into Gondor and Mordor to press their war directly against Sauron. And we, as we saw in the films and the books, and our three characters head north to, well, conduct a war in the north. I know, we took a long way to get here, but that is the overall plot of the game. The developers took a lot of pains to keep the story of the game as lore accurate as possible, cross-checking what lore they were using and the types of enemies the players would face against both in the novels, even going back to the books The Hobbit as well as The Silmarillion, and the movies. A lot of the characters and locations the players encounter do have deep and extensive lore behind them, and even the few places the developers created feel like they would fit well into the background of the novels and the movies. The gameplay itself is divided into single-player or online multiplayer. In single-player, at the beginning of each game chapter, the player picks one of the three heroes to play as the leader, and the other two follow up, with computer AI controlling them, as they hack and chop their way through legions of orcs, trolls, and other monsters with sword, axe, and magic, as well as ranged options. In multiplayer, which supports 3 players, each player controls one of the 3. The characters can collect and buy new weapons and armor with gold they find, and there are secrets to find in each level, based on which character you are playing. Hell, you can even replay levels as the characters you didn't pick to find new gear and gain more cash to buy better stuff. As the players go, they collect experience and level up the same simple way action RPGs work, but at heart, War in the North is a brawler, a medieval Streets of Rage wearing a high fantasy costume. There are even dialogue trees and conversations, similar to Mass Effect, but there are no game-affecting moral choices tied to these. They just offer more background and lore for the players to learn. This is not a bad thing, believe me. It just grounds the setting further as being a full world outside of the movies themselves. But while the game was conceived as a co-op game first, as the developers had gone on to state, they did try to make sure that the single player was not ignored, as we often hear the arguments about in the current time. Well, I played the whole thing single player, and so I cannot speak for the co-op experience, but I do know the computer AI functioned extremely well in single player capacity. But then again, War in the North is not a complex game. A game need not be complex. War in the North is a solid AA title, a great addition to the Xbox 360 years that can be played through in about 10 to 12 hours. As you can guess, the critics at the time were not kind, saying at best it was mixed to average. Critics complained the game was a quote-unquote too safe and did nothing new or nothing to distinguish itself from the franchise or from better titles. It is one of those times I have to ask the professional critics, are y'all idiots? Lord of the Rings as a property has existed for almost 70 years now. Everyone from George R. R. Martin to Jim Butcher to Terry Pratchett to, well, me, have written novels with some kind of direct influence from those novels, and high fantasy is a damn solid bedrock trope. What did you expect? Dwarves sitting around dropping F-bombs while bellyaching about their drug habits and divorces? Elves having guilt-ridden incest issues? Dragons forsaking their hoards of gold to start a space program and do stand-up comedy they hate? Please, keep that bullshit drama for half-wit Hulu streaming fodder, you miserable fucks. Regardless, the game was a commercial failure, and Warner Brothers went a somewhat different edgelord direction with their next LOTOR game, Shadow of Mordor. This was made worse by its unfortunate release window, as it debuted within the 3-week span of time between the release of Dark Souls and The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, games based in large part upon, and who would not exist without the writings of Tolkien. Again, War in the North is not a bad game. In fact, it is the right kind of game for a property around whom the fires of commercialization had already cooled. This would be the point where I would encourage you, dear listener, to play it for yourself. But Steam has recently delisted it from its platform, so unless you already bought it, you can't now. And physical copies are hard to come by, mostly found in second-hand shops and retro gamer retailers, provided you have an old console to play on. Unless it is hidden somewhere in something like Game Pass, then I am unaware where else you could find a copy at the time of this recording. Lord of the Rings, The War of the North, is a game I greatly enjoyed and have played through multiple times, brilliantly voice-acted by famous names in the industry, and with rock-solid action-brawler mechanics underpinning the gameplay, and a fun side story in a setting known the world over at this point in history. I would dare Warner Brothers Interactive to make a sequel with today's technology, as they are another company that enjoys squatting upon their microtransaction-riddled properties like a Mythic Dragon. But I know there is no commercial viability in it, so it'll never happen. But at least, with this small review of the game, I can keep the beacons of War in the North lit. Thank you for listening.